The air in the grand atrium of the verdant spire hung thick with the scent of crushed moon petals and ozone, a perfume as alien and unsettling as the being who stood at its heart. Princess Lyra of the Claridian Dominion. Her skin the deep, luminous green of forest shadows under twin suns, stood rigidly still. Her hair, a cascade of pure, shimmering white that seemed to drink the ambient light, framed a face of sharp, elegant angles currently twisted into an expression of profound exasperation. Her long, slender fingers, tipped with faintly iridescent nails, were clenched at her sides, and the delicate frills along her jawline pulsed with a soft, warning bioluminescence. A natural alarm system broadcasting a simple, vital message to any creature with eyes. Asterisk danger. Do not approach. Asterisk she was, quite literally, poisonous. A single, prolonged touch from her bare skin could induce paralysis, vivid hallucinations, or, in the unlucky, a rather undignified and permanent nap. This biological quirk, a legacy of her world's hypertoxic flora, was the bedrock of Claridian royal protocol and the source of her current, immense frustration. Before her, radiating an aura of cheerful, bone-headed obliviousness that seemed to warp the very air around him, stood Finian Thorn. He wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't even supposed to be alive, technically, after his rickety survey shuttle had crash-landed on the outskirts of the capital city, Zephyria Prime, 3 solar cycles ago. Rescued, or perhaps merely detained, by palace guards who mistook his frantic waving for a hostile gesture. He'd been deemed a low-level curiosity, a hairless, pink-skinned anomaly with an alarming tendency to ask impertinent questions and attempt to pet the bioluminescent garden slugs. His official designation was non-threatening xenobiological specimen Gamma 7, but everyone, from the stern Chamberlain Vrax to the kitchen drones, just called him the Human. And right now, the Human was doing the one thing every sentient being in the galaxy, from the silicon-based miners of Cetus 4 to the energy wraiths of the Veil Nebula, knew better than to do. He was ignoring the princess's very clear, very venomous warning. "Don't touch me," Lyra stated, her voice a low, melodic chime that somehow managed to carry the weight of a collapsing star. It wasn't a request. It was a biological imperative, a statement of fact as undeniable as gravity. "I am poisonous. My epidermal secretions are neurotoxic to carbon-based lifeforms. Contact beyond 3 seconds induces systemic failure. 6 seconds is usually fatal. Do you comprehend the parameters of your impending demise?" She enunciated each word with the precise, clipped diction of someone who had repeated this warning approximately 847 times since Finian had been granted limited, heavily supervised access to the palace gardens, a concession made only after he demonstrated an uncanny ability to coax rare, singing orchids into bloom using nothing but off-key humming and sheer, baffling enthusiasm. Finian, however, seemed to operate on a different set of parameters entirely. His eyes, wide and the color of storm clouds over Earth's oceans, weren't fixed on the pulsing frills or the subtle sheen of toxin beginning to bead on Lyra's temples. They were fixed on her, the set of her shoulders, the slight tremor in her clenched hands, the way her luminous green skin seemed to dim just a fraction under the weight of her isolation. He'd watched her for weeks, this regal, solitary figure moving through the vast, echoing halls like a ghost haunting her own home. He'd seen the way the courtiers gave her a wide berth, their respectful bows performed from a distance that felt less like deference and more like fear. He'd overheard the hushed whispers about the cursed princess, the living weapon, the untouchable heir. And in that moment, seeing the profound loneliness etched beneath her stern facade, Finian Thorn's notoriously illogical human heart overruled every shred of self-preservation instinct, every protocol drilled into him by the nervous palace guards, and every single word of Lyra's meticulously delivered warning. He didn't lunge. He didn't grab. He simply stepped forward, closing the careful distance she'd maintained, and wrapped his arms around her in a gentle, encompassing hug. It was awkward, slightly clumsy. His arms barely reached around her slender frame, his chin bumping against the top of her head, where her white hair felt surprisingly soft, like spun moonlight. He held her with the simple, uncomplicated warmth of someone offering comfort, utterly disregarding the fact that he was embracing a walking biohazard. Time didn't so much stop as fracture. The ambient hum of the atrium's climate systems seemed to vanish. The distant chime of crystalline wind sculptures froze mid-note. Even the ever-present, gentle glow of the living walls dimmed in collective shock. Lyra went utterly, terrifyingly still. Not the stillness of stone, but the coiled stillness of a predator caught mid-pounce, or perhaps a bomb counting down its final seconds. Her breath hitched, a tiny, strangled sound lost in the sudden vacuum of silence. The bioluminescent frills along her jaw flared incandescent white, then flickered erratically, casting strobing shadows across Finian's earnest, utterly unrepentant face. A low, involuntary hum vibrated in her chest, the precursor to a full defensive toxin expulsion, a last-ditch biological failsafe. Finian, for his part, just held on. He felt the initial rigidity of her body, the unnatural coolness of her skin even through the thin, iridescent fabric of her ceremonial robes. He felt the frantic, bird-like flutter of her pulse against his own chest. He smelled the sharp, clean scent of ozone and something else, something green and ancient and utterly alien, mingled with the faint, sweet perfume of moon petals. He didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. He just hugged her, because in that moment logic, biology, and galactic protocol were irrelevant. All that mattered was the profound, aching isolation radiating from her, and the simple human impulse to offer connection, however foolishly. The toxin didn't come. Not the paralyzing flood, not the hallucinogenic mist. Instead, something else happened. A strange, warm, tingling sensation spread from the points where Finian's skin touched hers, through the thin fabric of her sleeve where his hand rested on her arm, through the back of her robe where his chest pressed against her spine. It wasn't painful. It wasn't even unpleasant. Felt different, like static electricity mixed with sunlight. Lyra's eyes, wide and luminous as polished emeralds, snapped open, staring not at Finian, but seemingly through him, as if witnessing something impossible. A faint, almost imperceptible golden shimmer, utterly alien to her usual green and white palette, flickered across her skin where he touched her, vanishing as quickly as it appeared. Her rigid posture softened, just a fraction, the coiled tension bleeding away into something akin to bewildered wonder. The frantic pulsing of her frills slowed, settling into a steady, calm rhythm. The silence shattered not with an explosion, but with a choked gasp from the arched entranceway. Chamberlain Vrax stood frozen, his four-jointed limbs rigid with horror, his multifaceted eyes wide with disbelief. Behind him, a cluster of courtiers and guards had gathered, drawn by the commotion, their collective intake of breath sounding like a deflating airlock. Protocol demanded immediate intervention. Protocol demanded the human be stunned, quarantined, and likely dissected for daring such an act of treasonous intimacy. Protocol demanded Lyra be isolated, decontaminated, her volatile state contained. But Lyra raised a single, trembling hand, not in a gesture of command, but in a silent, desperate plea for them to stop, to not ruin this impossible, terrifying, beautiful anomaly. Her gaze remained locked on Finian, searching his face with an intensity that bordered on desperation. "Why?" she whispered, the melodic chime of her voice now rough with unshed tears and raw confusion. "Why would you do such a thing? You knew what I am." Finian finally pulled back slightly, just enough to look into her eyes. His own were bright, not with fear, but with a sincerity that was almost painful in its simplicity. "Because you looked like you needed it," he said, his voice rough but gentle. "And, well, back home, when someone looks that sad and alone, you don't stand around quoting toxicity levels. You just hug them." He offered a small, lopsided grin that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Turns out, maybe your poison doesn't work on stupid humans? Or maybe—" He trailed off, glancing down at his own hands, then back at her shimmering skin. "Maybe it's not poison for everyone?" Before Lyra could process this bewildering notion, before Vrax could find his voice to order the guards forward, the ground beneath their feet gave a violent lurch. Not an earthquake, Zephyria Prime was geologically stable. This was sharper, more focused. A deep, resonant thrum vibrated through the crystalline floor, followed by the unmistakable shriek of rending metal and the acrid tang of burning circuitry flooding the air. Alarms, unlike any Lyra had ever heard, harsh, grating, devoid of the usual melodic warnings, blared from the palace's central spire. Crimson emergency lights, usually reserved for catastrophic breaches, bathed the atrium in a hellish glow. "Princess!" Vrax's voice cracked with genuine panic, shattering his usual composure. "The lower defense grids, they're being overridden. External breach in Sector Gamma. It's the Scourge." The name hit Lyra like a physical blow. The Scourge. Not a nation, not an empire, but a plague of marauders. A nomadic fleet of cybernetically enhanced scavengers who consumed worlds, stripping them of resources, technology, and life itself, leaving only sterile husks. They were the boogeymen of the Outer Rim, a shadowy terror whispered about but never seen this close to the Claridian core worlds. Their arrival here, at the heart of the Dominion, was unthinkable, impossible. Yet the evidence was undeniable: the violent tremors, the alien alarms, the panicked shouts echoing from distant corridors. Chaos erupted, courtiers scattered like startled flockbirds, their elegant robes tangling as they fled towards supposedly secure inner chambers. Guards, their bioluminescent armor flaring to combat readiness, surged past, energy lances crackling to life. The serene beauty of the grand atrium dissolved into a scene of panicked disarray. Lyra's mind, usually a fortress of calm calculation, reeled. The scourge, here, now, and she was standing in the middle of it all, her skin still humming with the impossible warmth of a human's embrace, her carefully constructed walls of isolation momentarily forgotten. Her gaze snapped to Finian. He wasn't running. He wasn't cowering. He stood rooted to the spot, his storm-gray eyes scanning the chaos with a sharpness that belied his usual goofy demeanor. He saw the fear in the fleeing courtiers, the grim determination on the guards' faces, the utter devastation dawning on Lyra's features. He saw the way her hand instinctively went to the ornate, non-functional ceremonial dagger at her hip, a symbol of her station, useless in a real fight. And he saw the raw, vulnerable terror beneath her regal facade, the terror of a young woman suddenly facing the annihilation of everything she knew. Right? Finian muttered, more to himself than anyone else. He squared his shoulders, the easygoing tourist replaced by something harder, more focused. Okay, poisonous princess, alien marauders, exploding palace. Just another Tuesday. He turned to Lyra, his voice cutting through the din with surprising authority. Your Highness, Lyra, where's the real fight happening? And do you have anything sharper than that fancy letter opener? Lyra stared at him, momentarily speechless. This pink-skinned anomaly who had just risked death for a hug was now asking for weapons? In the face of the scourge? It was ludicrous. It was insane. It was strangely, terrifyingly comforting. The sheer, audacious humanity of him, his refusal to be cowed by the impossible, sparked something within her. Not just the usual defensive venom, but a flicker of defiance, of fight. She wasn't just the untouchable heir. She was Lyra of Claridia, and her home was under attack. The armory, she said, her voice regaining its melodic strength, though laced with urgency. Sublevel 3. But the main lifts are likely compromised. We'll need to take the service conduits. She pointed towards a narrow, unassuming archway hidden behind a curtain of glowing vines. A servant's passage, known only to the palace staff and the royal family. Follow me, and try not to touch anything else that might explode. Finian grinned, a flash of white teeth in the crimson gloom. Wouldn't dream of it, Your Highness. Lead the way. He fell into step beside her, not too close, respecting the space she needed, yet radiating a steady, grounding presence. As they ducked into the dimly lit service corridor, the sounds of battle grew louder, the sharp crackle of energy weapons, the guttural roars of scourge warriors, the sickening crunch of reinforced crystal giving way. The air grew thick with smoke and the metallic stench of blood, both Claridian green and something darker, oilier. The service conduit was a maze of humming pipes, flickering emergency lights, and low ceilings. Lyra moved with the silent grace of a predator, her bare feet making no sound on the cool metal grating. Finian, less graceful, bumped his head twice and muttered creative earth curses under his breath, but kept pace, his eyes constantly scanning the shadows. They passed a junction where two palace guards lay slumped, their bioluminescent armor dark, their green blood pooling on the grating. Lyra paused, a flicker of grief and rage tightening her features, but she didn't stop. There was no time. There after the hearthstone, she said abruptly, her voice low as they navigated a steep, spiraling staircase. The core of our planetary shield generator. Without it, Zephyria Prime is defenseless. They'll strip the city bare, atom by atom. Her white hair clung to her temples, damp with sweat and the acrid air. It's kept in the sanctum, deep beneath the throne room, heavily shielded, or it was. Right? Finian nodded, his mind racing. He'd seen schematics during his specimen orientation, basic palace layouts. The sanctum was a fortress within a fortress. So we get to the armory, grab some toys, then head for the sanctum before they crack it open? Sounds like a plan. He sounded far more confident than he felt. He was a botanist, for crying out loud, not a soldier. His most dangerous encounter before this had been a particularly aggressive Venus flytrap back on Earth. They reached the armory's reinforced blast door. It was sealed, the access panel dark. Lyra placed her palm against a biometric scanner. Nothing happened. Scourge countermeasures, she hissed, frustration edging her voice. They've locked down the internal systems. She stepped back, her eyes narrowing. A low hum began to emanate from her, and the air around her hands shimmered with visible heat haze. Finian watched, fascinated despite the danger, as the green skin of her palms seemed to glow faintly from within. She pressed her hands against the seam of the massive door. There was a sizzling sound, like water hitting hot metal, and the smell of ozone intensified. The metal began to glow cherry red, then white-hot, around her touch points. With a groan of tortured metal, the seam began to melt, dripping molten slag onto the floor. Within seconds, she'd carved a rough, human-sized hole through the foot-thick alloy. Whoa! Finian breathed, genuine awe replacing his earlier bravado. Okay, that's handy. He scrambled through the hole after her, coughing in the acrid smoke. The armory was a cavernous chamber lined with racks of weapons that looked like deadly works of art, crystalline lances that hummed with contained lightning, wrist-mounted projectors that fired concentrated sonic pulses, gauntlets that crackled with bioelectric energy. Lyra moved with purpose, selecting a pair of sleek, forearm-mounted emitters that glowed with a soft green light. She strapped them on with practiced ease. Then she turned to Finian, holding out a heavy, pistol-like device with a complex array of crystalline focusing lenses. This is a resonance disruptor, she explained quickly. It emits a frequency that interferes with scourge cybernetics. Aim for the joints, the neural ports on their necks. It won't kill them, but it will disable them long enough for whatever comes next. She hesitated, then added, and try not to shoot yourself. Or me. The feedback pulse can be unpleasant. Finian hefted the disruptor. It was heavier than it looked, cool to the touch. Got it. Joints and neck ports. No shooting the poisonous princess. Check. He managed a shaky smile. Lead on, Your Highness. Emerging from the armory, they were immediately met with the brutal reality of the invasion. The corridor beyond was a war zone. Scourge warriors, hulking figures encased in mismatched, scavenged armor. Their flesh fused grotesquely with crude cybernetics. Glowing red optical sensors replacing eyes were battling the palace guard. Energy bolts sizzled through the air, shattering crystalline walls. The Scourge fought with brutal, efficient savagery. Their movements jerky but powerful, enhanced by their crude implants. One guard went down, his bioluminescent armor flickering out as a Scourge brute crushed his chest with a hydraulic fist. Lyra didn't hesitate. She raised her forearm emitters. Twin beams of coherent green energy lanced out, striking a Scourge warrior in the chest. The creature didn't scream. It simply convulsed violently as its cybernetics overloaded, sparks erupting from its joints before it collapsed, twitching. Finian, heart hammering against his ribs, raised his disruptor. He aimed at a Scourge warrior bearing down on a wounded guard, squeezed the trigger. A high-pitched whine filled the air, and the warrior staggered, its red eye flickering erratically, its movements becoming uncoordinated. The guard took the opportunity to plunge his energy lance into its neck port. It fell. Nice shot, Lyra called over the din, already moving, her emitters weaving a deadly green web. She was a whirlwind of lethal grace, her movements fluid and precise, using the environment for cover, her poisonous skin a non-issue in the heat of combat. The Scourge seemed to instinctively avoid direct contact, perhaps sensing the danger. They fought their way towards the central lift shafts, a desperate, chaotic ballet of survival. Finian learned quickly. He discovered the disruptor had a wide area effect if he held the trigger down, creating a disorienting pulse that gave them precious seconds to move. He used his knowledge of the palace layout, remembering service hatches and maintenance tunnels, to flank the Scourge or find safer paths. He wasn't a hero. He was scared witless, his hands slick with sweat on the disruptor's grip, his breath coming in ragged gasps. But he kept moving. He kept fighting. Because Lyra was fighting. Because this impossible, green-skinned princess who radiated poison and loneliness was risking everything for her home. And he couldn't just stand by. They reached the main lift lobby. The grand, circular chamber was partially collapsed, debris littering the floor. The central lift shaft was a gaping maw of twisted metal. But worse, A squad of scourge warriors, larger and more heavily augmented than the others, were clustered around a secondary access point, a reinforced hatch leading directly down to the sanctum levels. They were using some kind of plasma cutter, the air shimmering with intense heat as they worked to breach it. "There!" Lyra hissed, pointing. "They're almost through." Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through her. If they reached the hearthstone, Finian scanned the scene. The scourge squad was focused entirely on the hatch. The debris offered some cover. An idea, half-formed and utterly reckless, sparked in his mind. "Lyra," he said, his voice tight with urgency. Can you make a really big, really loud noise? Something to distract them?" Lyra frowned, confused. "A noise? Like what?" "Like, overload something, blow up a power conduit. Anything to make them look away from that hatch for just 10 seconds. Understanding dawned in her emerald eyes. She glanced at a cluster of thick, humming power conduits snaking along the ceiling near the scourge position. A dangerous, almost feral smile touched her lips. "I can do better than noise." She raised her emitters not towards the scourge, but towards the conduits. "Get ready to run, human." She fired. Not a beam, but a sustained, focused pulse of energy directly into the main conduit junction. There was a deafening crack like a thunderclap contained in a box, followed by a blinding flash of green-white light. The conduits exploded in a shower of sparks and molten shrapnel. The scourge warriors whirled around, their red sensors flaring, momentarily blinded and disoriented by the blast. "Now!" Finian yelled, already sprinting from their cover, not towards the sanctum hatch, but past it, towards a cluster of decorative, but structurally vital, crystalline support pillars on the far side of the lobby. He raised his disruptor, not at the scourge, but at the base of the nearest pillar. He poured every ounce of power the device could muster into it. The high-frequency whine became a shriek. The crystalline pillar, resonating at its fundamental frequency, began to vibrate violently. Cracks spiderwebbed across its surface. Lyra, realizing his insane plan, added her own emitters to the effort, focusing her energy on the same pillar. The combined assault was too much. With a sound like a mountain sighing, the pillar shattered. Not just broke, it disintegrated into a cloud of razor-sharp crystalline dust. The collapse was instantaneous. The ceiling above the scourge squad, suddenly unsupported, groaned and gave way in a catastrophic avalanche of crystal and metal. Tons of debris crashed down, burying the scourge warriors and, crucially, completely blocking the sanctum hatch under an impassable mountain of rubble. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of dying fires and the groans of settling debris. Finian and Lyra stood panting in the sudden quiet, covered in dust, staring at the tomb they'd just created. The immediate threat to the sanctum was neutralized, at least for now. Lyra turned to Finian, her expression unreadable in the dim emergency lights. The frantic energy of battle was fading, replaced by exhaustion and something else, a dawning realization. She looked at his hands, still gripping the disruptor, then at her own emitters. She remembered the impossible warmth of his hug, the way her toxin hadn't harmed him, the golden shimmer on her skin. And now this reckless, brilliant, utterly human gambit that had saved the hearthstone. "You," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "You used resonance. Like the orchids." She'd seen him do it in the gardens, humming just the right note to make the crystalline blooms vibrate and sing. He'd applied the same principle to destroy. Finian just shrugged, a weary, lopsided grin returning. "Turns out botany has its uses in a pinch. Who knew?" He winced, rubbing his shoulder where he'd slammed into a bulkhead during the sprint. "So what now, princess? Do we dig them out? Or?" Before she could answer, a new sound cut through the silence. Not the alarms, not the groans of the palace. It was a deep, rhythmic thrumming, growing steadily louder, vibrating up through the floor. Came from below, from the direction of the buried sanctum hatch. And it wasn't the sound of digging. It was the sound of something powerful. And it was getting closer. The scourge weren't buried. They were digging through, and whatever was leading them, it wasn't using brute force. The thrumming had a strange, almost organic quality, a resonance that made Lyra's own skin prickle with unease, a feeling deeper than fear. Felt familiar, wrongly familiar. Lyra's eyes widened in dawning horror, her earlier exhaustion forgotten, replaced by a cold dread that seeped into her bones. The scourge weren't just scavengers. They had found something. Something that resonated with the very core of Claridian biology. Something that could bypass her poison, bypass the sanctum's shields. Something that knew the hearthstone song. And it was coming up, right towards them. Finian saw the terror in her eyes, the way her luminous green skin seemed to pale. He tightened his grip on the disruptor, the weight of their fragile victory crumbling beneath the approaching, ominous thrum. The hug felt like a lifetime ago. The real fight, the fight against whatever ancient, resonant horror the scourge had unearthed from the depths, was only just beginning. And this time, Lyra's poison might be the least of their worries. The thrumming from below grew louder, a deep, resonant pulse that vibrated in Lyra's bones and made the air itself feel thick and charged. Finian stood beside her, disruptor raised, his knuckles white, his breath shallow. The mountain of rubble sealing the sanctum hatch groaned, cracks spiderwebbing across its surface as something immense and relentless pushed upward from the depths. Lyra's mind raced. This wasn't just scourge technology. This was something older, something that hummed with the same frequency as the hearthstone, as her own blood. It felt like a perversion of her world's life song. Just as a jagged fissure split open in the debris, spilling eerie green light from below, a new sound cut through the tension. A sharp, melodic chime, clear and commanding. From the ruined archway of the lift lobby, flanked by a dozen elite royal guards whose armor blazed with renewed bioluminescence, strode Queen Silva, Lyra's mother. Her green skin was etched with the lines of command and worry, but her white hair flowed like a banner of defiance, and her eyes burned with regal fury. Behind her, engineers scrambled, rerouting power, sealing breaches. "The hearthstone is secure," the queen announced, her voice ringing with authority that stilled even the thrumming for a heartbeat. The scourge breached the outer sanctum, but not the core. Their leader, a corrupted biomechanical entity fused with stolen Claridian resonance tech, was lured into a containment field. "It is neutralized." She stepped forward, her gaze sweeping over the devastation, then settling on Lyra and Finian, still standing side by side amidst the dust and ruin. Her expression softened, just slightly. "And it seems my daughter did not face this alone." The relief that washed over Lyra was so profound it nearly buckled her knees. Finian lowered his disruptor, letting out a long, shaky breath. The immediate threat was over. The palace, though scarred, still stood. Zephyria Prime was safe. In the days that followed, the verdant spire buzzed not with fear, but with the hum of reconstruction and quiet celebration. The Scourge fleet, leaderless and disoriented after the destruction of their resonance commander, had been driven off by the reactivated planetary shields, their shattered remnants scattering into the void. Finian, once Specimen Gamma 7, was now spoken of in hushed tones of awe and gratitude. He'd not only hugged the untouchable princess, he'd helped save the world, but the true wonder unfolded slowly, in quiet moments. Scientists, led by a fascinated Vrax, now less Chamberlain, more chief xenobiologist, discovered the astonishing truth. Finian's human biology possessed a unique harmonic resonance that didn't just resist Lyra's toxins, it neutralized them on contact. His touch didn't trigger her defenses. It soothed them. The golden shimmer Lyra had seen? It was a biosynaptic bridge, a compatibility so rare it defied galactic odds. Where others saw poison, Finian's cells sang a countermelody of harmony. He wasn't immune. He was complementary. This revelation changed everything. The ancient Claridian law of isolation, born of fear and tragedy, began to crumble. If one human could touch their princess without harm, what did that say about the nature of their curse? Lyra, emboldened by Finian's unwavering presence and her mother's quiet support, began to step beyond the boundaries of her gilded cage. She walked the gardens without gloves. She accepted a flower from a child without flinching. And always Finian was there. Not as a guard, not as a specimen, but as her steadfast companion, his hand often gently resting on her arm, a silent testament to their impossible bond. Their courtship was a spectacle of gentle absurdity and profound tenderness. Finian learned to navigate the complexities of Claridian etiquette, mostly by cheerfully ignoring it and charming everyone anyway. He taught Lyra earth songs, his off-key humming making her laugh, a sound rarely heard in the palace before. She showed him the hidden wonders of Zephyria Prime. Forests where trees sang in the wind, rivers that flowed with liquid light, and skies painted with auroras that danced to the planet's heartbeat. He brought her chocolate, a substance that made her frills pulse with confused delight, and she gifted him a living crystal that glowed in time with his heartbeat. 5 solar cycles after the Scourge invasion, under a sky ablaze with the twin suns and a shower of luminous pollen from the moon-petal trees, Lyra and Finian were married in the grand atrium, the very place where he'd first hugged her. The ceremony blended Claridian light-weaving rituals with earth traditions Finian remembered fondly. Lyra wore robes of living emerald vine that bloomed with white starflowers as she walked. Finian, in formal attire that somehow still looked slightly rumpled, beamed with unguarded joy. When they exchanged vows, Lyra didn't wear gloves. Her bare hand clasped his, skin to skin, poison and humanity intertwined, a living symbol of their union. No one flinched. Everyone wept. Their home became a bridge between worlds. They built a residence that merged Earth's cozy warmth with Claridian organic architecture. A dwelling that grew and breathed with them, its walls flowering in response to their moods. And then came the children. Their first child, a daughter named Alara, arrived with skin the soft green of new spring leaves and a shock of white hair that glowed faintly in the dark. She inherited her mother's grace and her father's mischievous grin. She could touch anyone without harm, her biology a perfect blend. A living harmony. Then came Kalen, a boy with Finian's storm-gray eyes and Lyra's luminous skin, who could hum a note that made the palace crystals chime in response. And little Mira, the youngest, who had Finian's stubbornness and Lyra's quiet intensity, and whose laughter sounded like wind chimes made of starlight. The palace, once echoing with formality and fear, now rang with the joyful chaos of family. Tiny bare feet, green and pink, pattered through the halls. Finian taught his children earth games, building forts out of luminescent cushions. Lyra read them Claridian star myths, her voice weaving tales of cosmic dragons and singing nebulae. They celebrated Earth birthdays with cake, slightly green-tinged, but delicious, and Claridian naming days with light dances under the auroras. Finian never stopped being gloriously, endearingly human. He still got lost in the palace corridors, still tried to pet the bioluminescent slugs, much to their annoyance, and still hummed off-key while tending his garden of earth flowers and alien moon petals. Lyra never lost her regal bearing, but her frills now pulsed with contentment more often than warning, and her touch, once feared, was sought after for its calming warmth. Years flowed like the light rivers of Zephyria Prime. The Scourge became a footnote in history, a shadow banished by courage and an unexpected hug. The Claridian Dominion, once insular, opened its arms to the galaxy, its poisonous air now its greatest ambassador of peace, her human consort always at her side. Their blended family a beacon of what was possible when fear was replaced by trust. One evening, decades after that fateful day in the atrium, an elderly Finian sat on a balcony overlooking the capital, his hair now silver like Lyra's had once been, his hand resting in hers, still green, still beautiful, still utterly safe in his grasp. Below, their grandchildren, a delightful mix of green, pink, and every shade in between, chased glowing fireflies through the gardens. Lyra leaned her head on his shoulder, the frills along her jaw pulsing a soft, steady gold. The color of harmony, of love, of a life built not in spite of differences, but because of them. "Still think hugging me was a good idea?" she asked, her voice still melodic, though softened by time. Finian squeezed her hand, his eyes crinkling with a smile that held a lifetime of shared sunsets, battles won, and quiet mornings. "Best idea I ever had, Your Highness," he murmured. "Turns out, the most dangerous thing in the galaxy wasn't your poison. It was the thought of never touching you again." And under the watchful gaze of twin suns and a sky full of stars, the poisonous alien princess and the human who hugged her anyway lived, loved, and thrived. Not just happily ever after, but wonderfully, messily, beautifully together. Their legacy written in the laughter of their children and the peaceful hum of a world that learned to embrace the unexpected.